My name is Eddie Lauren. I am 28 years old, and I've already ruined my whole life. This is the story of how I took a substance that brought me to my life today in hell. I was 12 years old when I used any kind of drugs for the first time. Like so many others, it was alcohol that got me started. That wonderful elixir alcohol that everyone loves. I used it because I wanted to forget things. I wanted to forget how my best friend had thrown himself off a bridge, or how people who were supposed to protect me had attacked me. But above all, I wanted to suppress the voices. They weren't just annoying, they scared me. Before I left home, my parents took me to a doctor who had diagnosed me with schizophrenia. For me, this meant that I had so-called auditory hallucinations. I heard voices. Voices that only existed in my head and constantly commented on everything I did. One of them, I called it Steve, was the loudest. When I was just walking across the street, it sounded like this in my head. Look at you walking. Like a cripple. Everyone's already staring at you. You can't be beaten for embarrassment. But that wasn't all. Most evenings, the voices started shouting at me. They always shouted the same thing. Kill yourself. You're worthless. Just kill yourself. But I didn't do that. Even though I was so messed up, I wanted to live. So I ran away from home when I was 13 and would never see my parents again. I soon realized that alcohol wasn't enough for me. When you're sleeping under a bridge and in alleyways, you need harder stuff. By offering services to various dealers, which I won't describe in detail, I got my hands on some H. It finally gave me what I wanted all along, to really shoot up. It was wonderful because the voices finally stopped. My life now consisted of somehow getting more H, finding somewhere to sleep and something to eat. There were shelters for the homeless that also provided you with soup and water, but they required you to be clean for at least 24 hours. I couldn't and didn't want to do that. Hey, keep your stupid soup. I'd find a banana or a packet of stale sausage in a garbage can. It was a warm summer night. I was just about to tie off my arm and give myself a shot when I had this wish for the first time, this dream. I imagined how it would have felt if everything had been different, if I'd never taken drugs at all, if I hadn't run away from home and I'd finished school, that maybe I could have one of those offices in one of those skyscrapers overlooking the whole city. I'd be wearing a suit and working on an expensive computer. That was a nice idea. Somehow I felt so stupid with the syringe in my hand. I undid the rubber band that I'd used to tie off my arm, and I didn't put the syringe in. Instead, I swapped it with Max, and he gave me a shirt in return, which had almost no holes and only a few stains. I washed it in the river that ran under the bridge where we lived, and then I hung it up on an old chair that I cleaned first. Tomorrow, I would try to get a job. The voices hadn't stopped, but I ignored them. I was the boss now. The next morning, I combed my hair, put on my new shirt, and set off for the city center. I didn't really have a destination. I just looked for advertisements on the windows of the various stores. I found that clothing stores, some burger shops, and a specialty electrical goods store were looking for new employees. Great. First, I introduced myself in one of the burger shops. They weren't averse at first and had me fill out a form. However, when they asked for my resume and references, I had nothing to show. This irritated them, and they said they'd get back to me. I had given them the phone number at the St. Joseph Center, and they said they would pass the message on to me, but I doubted that this would happen. The other stores also asked for resumes and the like, which made me think, wasn't there a computer and printer at the St. Joseph Center? Maybe I could use it briefly. It was Father McAndrews who opened the door for me. "Hello, Eddie. I haven't seen you for a long time. Our rules haven't changed since last time," he said. "Hello, Father. What I thought, I get it, but I'm not here to sleep. I have a completely different request. Can I use your computer?" I asked. Father McAndrews seemed puzzled and wondered what I was up to. "What's the point, Eddie? We don't want anything to do with business like that, son," he replied. "It's not about business, Father. I'm clean. Well, since yesterday, at least. I tried to get a job today, but everyone asks for a resume and references. I don't have anything like that, but if you'd let me use your computer for a few minutes, I could make a resume and print it out." The father had noticed that I was wearing a clean shirt, had combed my hair, and I was clear-headed. He nodded. "Come in, boy," he said. He even had a template for resumes on the computer, and all I had to do was enter my details there. While I was printing out my resume, the father put the icing on the cake. He had written me a recommendation with the signature and stamp of the institution. Since he believed that I was clean, he said I could sleep in the facility later if I wanted to, and how I wanted to. It had been years since I had last slept in a real bed. Full of vigor, I went back into town and turned up at the stores I hadn't visited before. 2 fashion stores and a pizzeria said they would be in touch. 1 burger shop even copied my resume and my recommendation from the patron. Maybe this was the jackpot. Satisfied, I made my way to the St. Joseph Center late that evening and told the father about my little success. He was genuinely happy for me and showed me to my room. I put my duffel bag down there and then joined the line for the shower. It took a while before it was finally my turn, but it was an incredible feeling to finally feel warm water on my skin and to feel clean again. I felt like a human being. The voices in my head grumbled a little, but they were much quieter than usual. The next morning, I packed my duffel bag and wanted to leave, but Father McAndrews stopped me. He said someone had called for me. A Judy from the Peacock Burger Shop wanted to tell me that the manager wanted to speak to me today at 3 p.m. It was about my application. My whole body began to tingle with joy. The father let me stay here for a while to prepare for the interview, and when the time came, I went to the burger shop, freshly showered, and told the counter that I had an appointment. The waitress led me back to Mr. Presley's office. "Good afternoon, Mr. Loren. Please have a seat," he said. "Good afternoon. Thank you, sir," I said, and sat down. Mr. Presley was sitting at his desk, apparently reading through my resume again. "Have you been successful in your long search, Mr. Loren?" he asked in an uncomfortable tone. I was a little confused. Did he mean my search for work that had only started yesterday? "I'm sorry, sir, I'm not quite following you," I replied. "Have you not read your own resume? It says you left Colston High School 4 years ago and have been in a period of self-discovery ever since. Have you been meditating for 4 years, sir? If so, you must have come to some interesting conclusions about your own existence and the universe, didn't you?" he grumbled. Now I was even more confused. Apparently, he wasn't impressed by my resume, so why had he invited me? "I'm sorry if my resume was unclear, sir, but I assure you that I'm willing to learn and will always do my best at work." I said that to diffuse the situation somewhat. "Ah, yes, what's your best? I mean, anyone can throw fries in the deep fryer, but when I look at your writing, I doubt it. Who writes school with an H before the L? Schoohl? Oh, your name? There's a 4 in your first name? What is your name? Eddie or EDD4IE? I felt like I was reading a monkey's application," he grumbled at me. He certainly wouldn't give me a job. There was a better chance that he'd punch me in the face, as red as he was. Please forgive me, Mr. Presley, but may I ask why you invited me for an interview? You don't seem very convinced by me." "Job interview? Who said anything about a job interview? Listen, I have to work hard to feed my family, very hard. Then I'm sitting here at 10 p.m. and instead of going home to my wife and son, I'm reading through your totally stupid application. You've stolen my time, sir. Not in 1,000 years would I hire you, not even if you paid me for it. The fact that you applied to me with this piece of paper is impertinence. A useless bum like you has no place here. Get lost, he said. He shouted and threw my resume at me. On my way out, it took all my willpower not to burst into tears in front of the people who were eating there. Even on the street, I kept telling myself that everything would be fine. I'd get a job soon and be able to afford my own apartment one day. I could still make something of myself. The voice in my head, the one I called Steve saw it differently. At last, thank God, someone has realized what a useless, stupid bum you are. Thank you, Mr. Presley. You've made my day, said Steve. I wanted to ignore him as I had done in the last few days. Are you finally going to end yourself? Then we'll all throw a party because the world will be a better place once you're gone, loser. He got louder again, louder than ever before. Loser, loser. End yourself. You're a damn loser, you idiot. Steve roared in my head. Stop talking, I shouted back and grabbed my skull. People on the street were frightened and looked at me as if I were crazy. But that's exactly what you are, you stupid junkie. Look at you. You can't even write your own name. And you think you're going to be something? Steve said and laughed. Maybe he was right. Today I didn't even go back to the St. Joseph Center because they had rules there. To stay there overnight, you had to be clean for at least 24 hours, and that wouldn't apply to me. I needed alcohol. I needed H. I needed peace from Steve, and I got all of it. I gave up my dream of living the good life that night. Instead of frying burgers, I scored and shot up, sleeping under the bridge again. What the hell? However, it was now harder to get money or drugs, because now I was 17 and the dealers didn't want to have anything to do with me. So I turned to the practice that so many of my neighbors under the bridge used to do, begging. That made me very uncomfortable. The others wrote things like, need to eat, or for my dog on their signs. I, on the other hand, wanted to preserve the last remnants of my dignity and wrote the following on my cardboard sign: do any work for a small donation. I wanted to do something for my money and not just rely on the mercy of others. It didn't go well. I got far fewer coins thrown into my bowl than the others. When I offered to sweep the yard or wash the car for a few donations, they refused and quickly moved on. You see, they pay you just to leave them alone. No wonder I wouldn't want a stinker like you anywhere near my house either. Steve shouted in my head. So I stopped doing that and concentrated on begging. Sometimes I pretended to limp, which worked well and brought in some good money. So I lived from day to day and was happy when I got my load of H. However, it became more difficult when the police arrested one of the dealers. It was no longer so easy to get hold of the stuff, so it became more expensive. My friend Kenny had an idea that we could still get some. He knew a kiosk that was relatively remote, and the owner counted the money every Friday evening and then took it to the bank. Kenny had a fake gun that looked very real. I wasn't comfortable with it, but the prospect of having to spend the whole night with Steve in my head made me agree. It was a Friday at 9 p.m. when we went into the store with socks over our heads and threatened the owner with Kenny's fake gun. Hey, throw the money in the bag. Go on, old man, or you'll catch a bullet, I shouted, trying to sound as threatening as possible. We didn't even realize that he was pressing the button under the counter because we thought only banks had that. Kenny tossed in the bag and the old man slowly started packing up money. Then he slowed down a little, and some even more, and grabbed his chest. When the guy fell over, we could already hear the sirens. Damn. Then everything happened so fast. The cops arrested us, and it got worse. The owner of the store, he died of a heart attack he suffered while we were robbing him. And then there was Kenny's fake gun. Turned out it wasn't a dummy. It was a real gun. We both got 25 years for armed robbery and involuntary manslaughter. Kenny went somewhere in Ohio, and I was sent to maximum security prison. Somehow it was bound to happen. I was now 28, and if I survived the next 25 years, I would be 53 when I got out. Many people thought that going to prison as a junkie wasn't such a bad thing. After all, you had no choice and would get clean. Of course, they thought wrong. It was much easier to get drugs in prison than on the street. There really was everything here. Weed, H, meth, a true paradise for the addict like me. To get more H, I prostituted myself. That worked quite well here. I was already 28, but the inmates here weren't as picky as the dealers on the outside. You've finally found your purpose, you loser. You've come to the right place. Then the poor people on the street won't have to put up with you anymore, Steve said in my mind. My cellmate Mike was the first person I ever told about Steve. He had killed a man with an axe, but he was still the nicest guy I'd ever met. He told me that his sister had also heard voices and had killed herself at some point. He didn't want me to feel the same way. My friendship with Mike gave me strength, but every day life in prison was tough. We were beaten or otherwise beaten up by guards. Sometimes there was no shower for weeks, and the toilets were flushed while we were showering just to torture us. We could shoot ourselves up with drugs and sometimes good H too, but that wasn't enough for me. At some point, Mike heard about a new, strange drug that would literally take you to another place. The stuff was supposed to be so strong that it would really make you feel like you were in another world. We got it through a new guard who'd been working here for a month. The risk was high, however, because there was a good chance of dying from it. The smallest amount of the stuff, you didn't even have to overdose. Unlike me, Mike really believed that it could take you away from this place. He'd been given a life sentence for murder, and of course he was desperately looking for a way out. Eventually, he managed to get some of the stuff. He showed me the syringe, which was filled to the top with a green liquid. I preferred to stick to the H myself, while Mike injected himself with a little bit of the liquid. The next morning, Mike was dead. The syringe was still hanging in his arm and was 99% full. My only real friend on this planet was no longer there. Before the guards made their rounds and counted the inmates, I removed the syringe with the green liquid from his arm and replaced it with mine with the leftover heroin. None of them cared about his death when they found him. They put him on a stretcher and made fun of the fact that he'd pooped himself as he died. I'd kept the syringe with the green stuff for a reason. "At last, you're finally listening to me and ending it," said Steve. Yes, I would finally listen to him. That evening, I sat alone in my cell in the exact spot where Mike had died. If a small drop of this drug killed him, I'd try the whole batch. That would surely take me to another place. To the cemetery, that is. With tears in my eyes, I untied my arm and got ready to inject myself. "It's been a wild ride, you stupid loser. Take care," Steve said in my head. "Take care," I replied conciliatively, and injected myself with the entire contents of the syringe. Colors, vibration, falling. Is this what it felt like to die? I was suddenly afraid of the nothingness that would come when my existence was over. Had I made a mistake? I had no idea. The colors intensified, and then everything went black. I opened my eyes and took a moment to get used to the brightness. Where was I? I found myself in a room that reminded me of a doctor's waiting room or an office of some kind. Apart from me, there were a handful of other people sitting here, all filling out notes or simply waiting. Had I survived and been taken to a doctor by the prison guards? Or was I dead, and this was the waiting room for new arrivals in hell? A huge muscular guy came in. He was wearing a far too small nurse's outfit and had a bag over his head. He had a badge on his chest with a smiley face on it. It said Team Peace. The way he looked, my theory about hell was more likely than a visit to the doctor. The big guy came up to me and handed me a clipboard with a form on it. The form said in big letters, Application Form, Team Peace. There were a few questions underneath. I didn't know what else to do, so I grabbed the pen on the side of the clipboard and filled in the questions. Age, 28 years old. Gender, male. Height, 5'9". Have you ever been to Taruza or Izdalar? No. Those places didn't mean anything to me. Do you suffer from arachnophobia? A fear of spiders? No. Why was that important? Would you consider working with corpses even if they can be slightly rude? Yes, no, or maybe. What? Rude corpses? I just ticked, maybe. Do you have any experience working with syringes? Yes, I had that. That was the last question. I wanted to give the clipboard back to the muscular nurse, but he waved it away and indicated with his hand that I should leave it in the hallway on the left. I went out into the corridor and found a small counter on the left. A little boy was sitting there, also wearing a Team Peace badge. The name tag read, Lucas, Senior Vice President of Marketing and Human Resources. I handed him the clipboard, and Lucas read through my answers. You know how to use syringes? He asked. Yes, I have some experience with that, I said. Great, you're hired, said Lucas. I had a job. A job in hell, but I had a job. Lucas gave me my Team Peace badge, and I pinned it on. If only it had been that easy in life to get a job. The little boy showed me the building. It was huge. The sleeping quarters for employees had their own wings. They weren't luxurious, but you didn't want for anything. There was a TV, books, a tablet, which you could order something to eat or drink from, and a comfortable bed. That was more than I had had in my whole lifetime. Lucas told me that he had to leave the old testing facility because it was no longer safe in this world. The secret place where this facility was located would be much safer in a long-term headquarters for Team Peace. Are we in hell here? I asked. What? What makes you think that? You think hell looks like an office building? The little boy replied. No, I just thought, well, because I died and then... Dead? You look quite alive to me, Mr. Lauren. You came to us because you were desperate. Team Peace also gives a home to outcasts. You're arrived now, Mr. Lauren, said Lucas. You know, that sounded kind of nice. As we drove down to the basement, I told him about the St. Joseph Center and that Team Peace somehow reminded me of it. We stopped at basement 3. The doors opened, and I was immediately hit by a disgusting stench. The hall must have been an acre in size and was home to thousands of bodies laid out on wheeled tables. Some of them looked fresh, others were badly decomposed. In the past, we've often had problems with employees who simply couldn't handle syringes. Some of them put them in the wrong place. Some somehow managed to inject themselves with the elixir by mistake. Your task will be to inject the elixir into the abdomen of the ladies who have kindly made themselves available to us. 1 dose for each corpse. The Model 369 Mother is easy to handle and will not cause you any problems after the resurrection. They will sit up and wait to be used afterwards. If one of the mothers is found wandering around, you simply guide it back to the place in a friendly manner, Lucas explained. I was unable to answer verbally and just nodded. I had a job, but did I even want this job? Lucas left me alone, and I looked at the syringes stored in the metal container. I was treated well here and given decent accommodations, but this was kind of weird work, really. Was it right for me? And was he serious that the bodies would get up if I injected them with this stuff? Maybe I should just leave. Are you crazy, you loser? We finally got a job, and one where we're treated well. Come on, let's get to work. Steve thought, speaking to me in my head again. I don't know, isn't this kind of sick? Resurrecting the dead? And how did we get here anyway? I asked Steve. That was the first time I had a real conversation with him. Otherwise, he just commented on my life. Maybe I didn't have schizophrenia, but a multiple personality disorder. The doctor at the time called it dissociative identity disorder, but said that I didn't suffer from it, that it was schizophrenia. It doesn't matter. People are nice to us for the first time in ages. We're not treated like dirt, and we have an important job. I'm grateful for you to finally making something of our lives, said Steve. Steve offered to do the first shift. I didn't know exactly what he meant by that, but I accepted his offer. It was an interesting experience. I felt like a passenger in a car sitting in the back seat. You could see the road, but you couldn't influence the driving behavior yourself. Steve had never done that before. I watched as he took one of the syringes and walked over to the first body. The woman was young and looked like she'd been run over, poor thing. Steve put aside the blanket covering her, and she was naked and pale. He injected the elixir into her abdomen and threw the syringe into the garbage can. Then he got the next syringe and injected it into the next test subject. I thought he did a really good job. When he had already reached number 16, the first body sat up. The woman's stomach was now bloated as if she were pregnant. Now we also understood why this model was called Mother. At some point, I took over for Steve, and we managed to produce about 100 mothers until we got really tired. Before I went to bed, I reported back to Lucas in his office. He was happy that I was making good progress and wished me a good night. That was nice. Finally, someone was nice to me. In my room, I looked at the menu on the tablet. It was almost endless. I could order pizza, sushi, steak, or enchiladas. I'd never tried sushi before in my life, so I ordered some norimaki with salmon, cucumber, and tuna. Less than 5 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, the sushi was there in a box, but there was no sign of a delivery man. I was surprised at how good it tasted and decided to order some more for breakfast tomorrow. Over the next few weeks, I continued to make friends with Steve and worked with him on the mothers. It worked quite well, and apparently the management was very happy with us. One day, Lucas called me into his office, and dutiful as I was, I immediately got in touch. "Hello, Eddie. You're doing a really good job so far," he said. "Thank you. I also enjoy working for Team Peace." The man of peace noticed that too. I told him about your experience with the St. Joseph Center, the one that takes in homeless people and offers them accommodation. "Can you imagine setting up a center like that for us?" he asked. "Me? Setting up a center for the homeless? Well, I guess so, but I'd need help and some resources," I said, surprised. "Oh, you'll get everything you need. As you know, our boss, the man of peace, is a loyal servant of the 7 demon lords, including Lucifer himself. He thinks that the Church of the Devil also needs a better external image. That's why you're going to open the Church of Lucifer's Peace Center for us. Incidentally, the Church of Lucifer is an official religion, and everything is registered and correct. Your only job is to set up and run the center." "Can you do that?" asked Lucas. I agreed. I wasn't aware that I was working for the devil himself in a roundabout way, but what was the point? After all, these Satanists treated me well and had given me a second chance. Since the Church of Lucifer's Peace Center was to be set up in my world, I knew my way around. I decided to set it up near the St. Joseph Center. All those poor souls who weren't allowed in there because they weren't clean would get a chance with us. Everyone who stayed with us also received flyers about Lucifer's church and had the chance to work for him. If I saw great potential in someone, I would refer them to Lucas. If someone became uncomfortable, like the religious activists who had something against Lucifer's church and regularly protested outside the center, I was to send them down the special elevator. They'd be taken care of there, Lucas always said with a smile. I knew what he meant, and that's why I never used the elevator. I prefer to help people, and that's what I did. We let him spend the night here, handed out flyers, gave out food, and hired people to spread the word of the devil. Yes, we've made something of ourselves, Steve said in my head. Yes, we have. I didn't think we could, I replied. It was 6 months after we opened when someone looking for a place to stay came in that I somehow recognized. I asked my colleague Hilda what the man's name was. He was registered with us as Mr. Presley, sir. He told me his business went bankrupt and his wife kicked him out because he's a drunk, Hilda replied. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Mr. Presley from the Peacock Burger Shop. I remember how he first gave me the hope of a job interview only to insult me and throw me out. He called me a monkey and a bum. That was the worst day of my life. I started shaking. It's him, Steve. It's Mr. Presley, I said in my head. Yes, I know. I could never forget that scumbag, replied Steve. What do we do now? What did he do when we needed his help? We can't send him away. Send him away? I want to kill him. No, I can't do that, I said and went over to Mr. Presley. Hello, Mr. Presley. I'm sorry that things didn't go well for you. Why don't you accompany me to my office and we can discuss how I can help you? Thanks, that's nice, Presley said, wiping some snot off his nose. We went to the elevator and the up button was pressed. Presley seemed pleased that someone was offering him help. Do you know who I am, Mr. Presley? What do you mean, he asked. The doors opened again. My name's Eddie. Eddie, without a 4. I can spell it for you. Eddie. Steve, Eddie. And Steve gave the poor man a kick. He fell out of the elevator into the dark basement, where the undead immediately pounced on him. They bit off his fingers as he tried to protect himself with his hands, ripped out one of his arms and bit him in the stomach, neck, and face. He screamed terribly, and Steve enjoyed it. Hey, horror fans! Do you want to learn more about the Man of Peace and his experiments? Then click here and subscribe to our channel. All stories on the channel are connected and tell one large story.